It was a bright afternoon when Emily first received the unexpected proposal that would change her life forever. At just 23 years old, she had already faced more struggles than most people twice her age. Her family had never been rich, and she had always done her best to survive. She worked multiple jobs, each one more demanding than the last, just to make ends meet. Emily had dreams, big dreams, but they always seemed just out of reach. In the same city, 68-year-old billionaire Richard Monroe was a man known for his immense wealth and powerful connections. He had built a massive business empire, but the one thing he could never control was his health. Diagnosed with a rare and terminal illness, Richard had been told that his time was running out. Despite his many doctors and specialists, there was no cure, and he knew the end was near. He had lived a life full of success but little joy, and now, with his health deteriorating, he felt a sense of emptiness. Richard's family was complicated, to say the least. His children, who were all adults, had their own lives and interests. They had their share of disagreements with their father over the years, but now, with his days numbered, they were more concerned with how his wealth and business would be divided. Richard had been preparing his will for months, knowing that his fortune needed to be protected. But his thoughts had drifted to something else entirely. What would happen to him in his final days? It was at one of his many charity events that he met Emily. She was working as a waitress at the event, serving drinks and food with a smile, even though her heart felt heavy from the struggles of her own life. Richard, in the middle of speaking with other guests, noticed her. She wasn't like the other people at the event. There was something genuine about her. Emily wasn't a model or someone who seemed to live in a world of luxury, but there was a beauty in her simplicity that caught his attention. Over the course of the evening, they exchanged a few brief words. At first, Richard wasn't sure what to think of her. She seemed kind, hardworking, and unpretentious, qualities he hadn't come across in a long time. Emily, on the other hand, had no idea who he was. He seemed like just another wealthy man with his own circle, a man she would never be able to get close to. But fate had different plans. The night ended, but Richard couldn't stop thinking about Emily. He found himself asking about her, learning more about her background and her life. He admired her determination and the way she carried herself despite all the obstacles she faced. He was intrigued by her, but what really struck him was her kindness. A few weeks later, he reached out to Emily in a way she never expected. Richard invited her to lunch, a gesture that seemed innocent enough at first. But over the course of the meal, he shared more about himself, his illness, and his desire to spend his last days doing something meaningful. He knew he didn't have much time left, but there was one thing he wanted more than anything: companionship. He didn't want to face the end of his life alone. At that moment, Richard proposed an idea that left Emily speechless. "Marry me," he said. "I don't have much time left, but I want you to be my wife." It was a shock. Emily's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. How could this happen? Why would he want someone like her? She was a young woman with no connection to his world. But Richard wasn't asking for love. He was asking for someone to stand by him in his final days. His offer wasn't just about money, though that was part of it. It was about a chance for companionship, for a connection in a time when his wealth and power no longer mattered. What followed next would surprise everyone, including Emily herself. What seemed like an unlikely proposal turned into a marriage that shocked the world. But little did anyone know, this union was just the beginning of a story that no one saw coming. After the unexpected proposal, Emily couldn't help but feel conflicted. On one hand, she knew the practical side of the marriage was appealing. The promise of financial security, the chance to escape from the endless grind of her daily struggles, and the comfort of not worrying about her future. But on the other hand, something didn't sit right. Richard was a stranger to her, a man who was nearly twice her age and suffering from a terminal illness. She couldn't help but question his intentions. Was he truly seeking companionship, or was this some sort of arrangement where he got to leave the world with his dignity intact, while she benefited from his wealth? It was hard to shake off the feeling that there might be more to it than just a simple proposal. Richard had made his intentions clear. He was looking for someone to be with him in his final days, someone who would be there for him in ways that family and friends couldn't. But Emily had heard all the rumors about him, how he had made billions, but had always been distant from those around him. His family seemed to care more about his fortune than about him as a person, and his business partners were always focused on growing his empire. Was this the kind of man Emily really wanted to marry? Despite these doubts, she couldn't deny that Richard was different from the men she had known. His wealth didn't make him arrogant, and his illness seemed to have stripped away any pretense he might have once had. She saw a vulnerability in his eyes that she hadn't expected. He was no longer the strong, untouchable billionaire he once was. He was simply a man, facing the inevitable with a quiet sadness. As Emily tried to make sense of everything, the world around her began to react. People were shocked by her decision to marry Richard. Her friends, who had always known her to be practical and independent, couldn't understand why she would choose to marry someone so much older and so ill. They assumed it was for the money, for the lifestyle that came with being married to a billionaire. And they weren't the only ones who thought that way. The media quickly latched onto the story, with headlines calling her everything from a gold digger to a heartless opportunist. Emily couldn't escape the scrutiny, and it weighed heavily on her. But she knew deep down that it wasn't just about the money. She didn't need it. What she truly wanted was stability, a sense of belonging, and maybe even love. Richard, despite his condition, offered her something she had never experienced before, a chance to step into a world beyond her wildest dreams. It was a world that came with luxury, but also with its own set of challenges. Emily had always dreamed of a better life, but she never expected it to come in the form of a marriage to a man who was on the verge of death. It was a reality she was still trying to come to terms with. Despite the outside world's judgment, Emily found herself growing closer to Richard. As they spent more time together, she saw a side of him that no one else seemed to see. He was kind, thoughtful, and even playful at times, despite the toll his illness had taken on him. He shared his hopes, his regrets, and his dreams, not about wealth, but about living a life that mattered. His greatest desire was to leave behind a legacy, not of money, but of love and connection. Emily's perspective began to shift. Maybe she wasn't marrying Richard for the reasons people thought. Maybe this wasn't just about money. Maybe in some strange way, they were both seeking something deeper, a connection that transcended age, wealth, and illness. But the pressure from his family continued to grow. They were suspicious of Emily's intentions, questioning whether she was really there for Richard or just for his wealth. His children, in particular, didn't hide their disapproval. They were used to having control over their father's empire, and saw Emily as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their world. They didn't understand why Richard had chosen her, and their judgment of her only added to the strain she was already feeling. Still, Emily pushed forward, determined to make the most of her new life. She had no choice but to navigate this complex world, filled with family tension, media attention, and the constant reminder of Richard's declining health. But she wasn't alone. Richard, despite his illness, supported her every step of the way. And slowly, Emily began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something real between them after all. The day of the wedding arrived, and it felt like the world was watching. The grand hall was decorated with lavish flowers, sparkling chandeliers, and an atmosphere of luxury that most people could only dream of. The media was everywhere, cameras flashing, reporters whispering, and guests trying to get a glimpse of the beautiful young woman who was about to marry one of the wealthiest men in the world. Emily stood at the entrance of the hall, her heart racing. She had imagined a wedding like this for years, but never like this. She had always pictured herself walking down the aisle to marry someone she loved, someone she had known for years, someone with whom she shared deep feelings. But today, she was about to marry Richard, a man who was not only much older but also nearing the end of his life. Emily wasn't sure how she felt. She didn't love Richard the way she had dreamed of loving someone, but there was something about him that made her feel a strange sense of responsibility and even care. As the wedding ceremony began, Emily could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. The guests, some of whom had been Richard's colleagues for years, were clearly uneasy, exchanging whispers about her decision to marry him. They weren't sure if she truly cared for him, or if this was just a business arrangement. But the truth was, Emily wasn't sure either. She had never expected to find herself in this position, and now that she was here, it felt like everything was moving so fast. Richard stood at the altar, looking frail but still handsome in his tuxedo. He had aged significantly over the past few months, his health deteriorating rapidly, but his eyes still sparkled with determination. Despite everything he was going through with this marriage, and he seemed at peace with his decision. Emily could see that he wasn't just looking for a young wife to inherit his wealth. He was looking for a companion, someone who could stand by him during his final days. His presence, calm and unwavering, gave her a sense of reassurance. As she walked down the aisle, Emily couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. She had no idea what the future would hold, but she knew that this marriage would change everything. The guests, the media, even Richard's family, all had their eyes on her. They expected her to act a certain way, to play the role of the perfect young bride. But Emily was determined to remain true to herself. She walked with her head held high, trying not to let the judgment of others affect her. The vows were exchanged, and for a moment, everything seemed to fall away. There was a sense of intimacy between Emily and Richard, something that hadn't existed before. They spoke of loyalty, commitment, and shared moments, but neither of them could deny the unspoken truth. They didn't know each other as well as they should. Still, the ceremony felt real in its own way. Despite the differences between them, they both made a promise to be there for one another, whatever the future held. As the ceremony concluded and they were officially declared husband and wife, the crowd erupted into applause. The media went wild, and the reporters rushed to get their questions in, all eager to uncover the secrets behind this unconventional union. Emily and Richard exchanged a brief smile, both understanding that this was only the beginning. Their lives together, however long or short, would be under constant scrutiny. Later, as they left the wedding venue and drove off into the night, Emily found herself reflecting on the vows she had just made. She had promised to stand by Richard, to be there for him when no one else could. It wasn't the kind of marriage she had always dreamed of, but it was real. As she looked at her new husband, she saw more than just a man who was ill. She saw someone who, despite everything, still held hope for the future. Maybe, just maybe, this would turn out to be something more than she had expected. The first few weeks of the marriage felt like a whirlwind for Emily. The world around her had shifted, and suddenly, she was thrust into a life of luxury and expectation that she had never imagined. People around her, from the media to Richard's friends, were always watching, questioning her every move. They whispered about her motivations, wondering if she was really in love with Richard or if she was only interested in his wealth. Emily knew the truth was much more complicated than that, but explaining it to others was a challenge. Despite the pressures, she tried to focus on her role as Richard's wife. At first, it seemed like she was just playing the part, smiling for cameras and attending events with him. But as time went on, Emily began to see things differently. She spent more time with Richard, helping him with his day-to-day needs and listening to him as he shared his hopes and fears. It wasn't the romantic love she had imagined, but there was a connection forming between them, a bond built on mutual respect and understanding. Then one day, Richard's lawyer contacted Emily about something that would change everything. She was asked to meet with him, and when she arrived, she was handed a thick envelope containing Richard's will. Emily had assumed she was simply being informed about the details of his estate, but what she read inside was something she had never expected. The will wasn't just about passing down money or assets. It was about something far more personal. Richard had made a significant provision for her, something that wasn't public knowledge and had never been mentioned to anyone else. At first, Emily was confused. The clause in the will revealed that Richard had left her not just a fortune, but control over a major part of his business empire. The business, which had always been his pride and joy, was to be managed by her after his death. But there was a catch. The provision wasn't something she could simply take for granted. To fulfill it, Emily would have to prove herself, not just as his wife, but as a capable businesswoman, someone who could handle the immense responsibility that came with running a multi-billion-dollar company. Richard believed in her, though, and he had confidence that she could handle the task, even if the rest of the world didn't think she was up to the challenge. Emily was stunned. The enormity of what she had just read was overwhelming. She never expected to be in charge of such a powerful company, let alone inherit it one day. And the media would have a field day when they found out. The thought of being scrutinized even more, now as someone with real power, made her nervous. But Richard had trusted her, and for the first time in her life, someone believed in her abilities. It was both an incredible opportunity and a heavy responsibility. As she sat there, holding the will in her hands, Emily had to face a difficult decision. She could back out, admit that she wasn't prepared for such a challenge, and let the company fall into the hands of someone else. Or she could take a leap of faith, prove herself, and live up to Richard's expectations. She knew this would be no easy task. Richard's children, who were already wary of her, would be even more hostile now that they saw her as a threat to their inheritance. But Emily wasn't the same woman she had been when she first met Richard. Over the weeks, she had grown stronger, more confident in herself. She realized she didn't have to prove anything to anyone but herself. After some contemplation, Emily made a decision. She would embrace this challenge, not for the money or the power, but because it was a chance to make a real difference. She wasn't going to let the judgments of others dictate her future. She would take control of the business, make it her own, and most importantly, honor Richard's trust in her. Little did she know, this decision would change the course of her life in ways he couldn't have predicted. It was just the beginning of a journey that would force her to grow in ways she never thought possible. And soon, the world would see her not as a young woman who had married a billionaire for his wealth, but as someone who had the strength and determination to take on an empire. As Emily began to settle into her new role, she quickly realized that the path ahead would be anything but easy. She had inherited more than just wealth. She had inherited a massive empire. Richard's business was complex, with thousands of employees, various international ventures, and financial strategies that were beyond anything Emily had ever dealt with. The pressure was immense, but it wasn't just the weight of managing a multi-billion-dollar company that worried her. It was the constant scrutiny from the public, her husband's family, and even her own doubts about whether she could live up to the expectations set before her. At first, Emily felt overwhelmed. She had no formal training in business, and yet here she was, standing at the helm of one of the most powerful companies in the world. She spent countless hours in meetings with Richard's trusted advisors, trying to understand the company's operations, its strengths, and its weaknesses. The more she learned, the more she realized how fragile the empire really was. There were rival companies watching her every move, ready to take advantage of any mistake she made. Richard's children, particularly his oldest son, made no secret of their disapproval of her. They believed the company was rightfully theirs, and they were determined to prove that Emily wasn't fit to lead. Despite these challenges, Emily refused to back down. She knew that Richard had put his faith in her, and she couldn't let him down. Slowly, she began to make her presence known. She started to take charge in meetings, making decisions that surprised even the most seasoned executives. Her ideas were fresh, her perspective different from what they had seen before, and although many of them were skeptical, they couldn't deny that she had a certain sharpness about her. Emily wasn't just going to follow the traditional ways of doing things. She was determined to bring innovation and change, even if it meant stepping on a few toes along the way. At the same time, Richard's health continued to decline. He was no longer able to attend meetings or be as hands-on with the company as he had once been. Emily knew that if she was going to keep the business alive and thriving, she would have to prove herself even more. The pressure was mounting every day, but Emily was learning how to handle it. With every decision, every boardroom meeting, she grew stronger, more confident in her abilities. She wasn't just managing the company. She was beginning to shape it into something new, something that was uniquely hers. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Slowly, the public began to change their opinion of her. What had once been a marriage that seemed built on money and convenience now looked like a partnership built on mutual respect. People started to admire Emily for her intelligence and her ability to handle the challenges thrown her way. She wasn't just a young woman married to a dying billionaire. She was becoming a force in her own right, someone who could hold her own in the corporate world. But not everyone was happy with the changes she was making. Richard's family, particularly his children, were still furious that she was in charge. They didn't understand why their father had trusted her instead of one of them. Tensions between Emily and the family reached a breaking point when Richard's son attempted to stage a hostile takeover of the company. Emily fought back, using every bit of business knowledge she had learned in such a short time. The battle was fierce, but in the end, Emily emerged victorious. It was a turning point, not just for the business, but for Emily as well. She had proven that she could stand up for herself and protect what Richard had entrusted to her. Despite the constant challenges, Emily was beginning to realize that this was more than just about money or business. She had found something within herself that she never knew existed. She wasn't just Richard's wife anymore. She was a leader, a woman who had earned the right to be taken seriously. She was building something that was truly her own, something that no one could take away from her. And as Richard's health continued to fade, Emily knew that the real test was still ahead. But she was no longer afraid of what the future held. She had already proven to herself and to the world that she was more than capable of handling whatever came next. As Emily's control over the company grew stronger, so did the resentment from Richard's family. They had always believed that they were the rightful heirs to his fortune and legacy. His children, especially his oldest son, James, had never liked the idea of Emily stepping in and taking charge. They had spent years watching their father build his empire, and to them, it was their birthright to inherit it. The fact that Richard had chosen Emily, a woman they saw as an outsider, to run everything was something they couldn't accept. James had always been the most vocal about his disapproval. He had worked for years in the company, thinking that one day it would be his to run. When Emily began making changes, it felt like his dreams were slipping away. The media had taken to calling Emily a new face in the business world, and while some praised her, many in Richard's family were furious. They didn't understand why Richard had trusted her more than them, and they saw this as a betrayal. At family gatherings, the tension was palpable. Emily could feel the cold stares from Richard's children and relatives, who spoke in whispers behind her back. They never said anything directly to her, but their attitude was clear. To them, she was just a young woman who had married their father for his money and influence. The idea that she might actually have a role to play in the family business was something they couldn't accept. Richard, however, continued to support her, even as his health worsened. He reminded his family that Emily had proven herself, that she was handling the business with care, and that he had made his decision. Despite his support, Emily felt isolated. She didn't have the luxury of family backing her up, and the constant judgment from Richard's children weighed heavily on her. There were moments when she questioned whether she was doing the right thing. Was she truly ready to carry the burden of such a large empire? Was she making the right decisions, or was she just lucky that things hadn't fallen apart yet? The doubt crept in, but she pushed it away. She had worked too hard to get here, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel like she didn't belong. But the pressure wasn't just coming from the family. The media had picked up on the drama surrounding the will and Emily's sudden rise to power. Headlines were filled with speculation about her motivations and the future of the company. Some painted her as a mastermind, manipulating Richard for his wealth, while others called her a hero, someone who had taken control in a difficult situation. The truth was somewhere in the middle. Emily wasn't after money, but she was determined to prove that she was capable of running the company. James, frustrated with his lack of power, decided to take matters into his own hands. He began spreading rumors within the company, trying to turn key employees against Emily. He knew that if he could get enough people on his side, he could force her out and take over himself. The whispers grew louder, and the once supportive staff began to look at Emily with suspicion. She was accused of being unqualified, of making hasty decisions, and of being too inexperienced to run such a large business. It was a difficult time for Emily, but she wasn't one to back down. She knew she had to act quickly to stop the rumors from spreading further. She called a meeting with the top executives of the company, including those who had been swayed by James' tactics. In a calm, measured voice, she addressed the concerns. She explained her vision for the company, her plans for growth, and how she intended to maintain Richard's legacy. Her confidence and clarity were unmatched, and slowly, the room began to quiet. She didn't raise her voice, but her presence alone commanded respect. By the end of the meeting, Emily had regained control. The employees who had once been uncertain now saw her as a leader. James, on the other hand, was furious. He had underestimated Emily, and he soon realized that she was not someone to be trifled with. The battle for control was far from over, but Emily had proven that she was willing to fight for what was hers, for what Richard had entrusted her with. As the days passed, the tension within the family didn't dissipate. Richard's health continued to decline, but his support for Emily never wavered. Emily, now more certain than ever of her place in the company, pushed forward with the changes she had set in motion. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. Slowly but surely, she was not only taking control of the business, but also making a place for herself in the family that had once doubted her. Over time, Emily's hard work began to pay off in ways she hadn't expected. At first, it had been a constant uphill battle, managing the vast business empire, gaining the respect of skeptical employees, and facing the ever-watchful eyes of Richard's family. But as weeks turned into months, Emily found herself becoming more than just the young wife of a dying billionaire. She was evolving into a true leader, one whose decisions shaped the direction of the company and garnered the attention of industry experts. The company, which had once been seen as fragile and at risk of collapsing without Richard's guiding hand, was now growing stronger under Emily's leadership. The changes she had implemented, from new product lines to improved employee benefits, had begun to show results. Revenue was up, and the company's public image was transforming from an old, established business to a dynamic, forward-thinking entity. The board members, who had initially doubted her ability to lead, were now speaking in her favor. She was no longer just managing the company. She was making it her own, and it was thriving. The media, which had once painted her as a gold digger, began to shift their narrative. Headlines once filled with speculation about her motivations were now praising her ability to turn the company around. They highlighted her intelligence, her drive, and her ability to stand firm in the face of adversity. Emily became a symbol of resilience, a woman who, against all odds, was not only surviving but succeeding. But success didn't come without its challenges. Richard's family, especially his children, continued to resent her. They could no longer deny that she had a firm grip on the business, and it angered them even more. James, Richard's eldest son, still tried to undermine her at every turn. He attempted to sway key shareholders, hoping to regain control of the company. But Emily was no longer intimidated by him. She had learned how to navigate the political landscape of the business world, and she knew how to outmaneuver him when necessary. Richard, though still very ill, had become a quiet but constant source of support for Emily. He saw the changes she was making and was proud of the way she had handled everything. In their private moments, Richard would tell Emily how grateful he was for her presence in his life. He had always been a man who focused on business, on wealth and success. But now, In the face of death, he had come to realize that the true value of life was found in human connection, in the bond he shared with Emily. She had given him more than he had expected. She had given him peace in his final days. Emily had come to care for Richard deeply. It wasn't the kind of love that she had originally hoped for, but it was real. She respected him for his wisdom, his resilience, and the way he had built something from nothing. She also admired the way he had never given up, even when the world seemed to be against him. In their quiet moments together, she found herself reflecting on how far they had come. This was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was her reality now. And in many ways, it was more fulfilling than anything she had ever dreamed of. As Emily's influence grew, she started to focus on the future. She wasn't just thinking about the company's success, but also about the legacy she wanted to leave behind. She began implementing plans to ensure that the company would continue to thrive long after Richard was gone. She worked tirelessly to secure the future of the employees, many of whom had supported her from the beginning. She created scholarship funds, improved working conditions, and set aside resources for innovation. Emily wasn't just building a company, she was building a community. The public, who had once questioned her every move, began to see her in a new light. Emily was no longer the young woman who had married a billionaire for his wealth. She had earned their respect, and as the business flourished under her leadership, she began to find peace in knowing that her hard work had paid off. The company, which had once been Richard's legacy, was now her own, and she was determined to make sure it would last for generations to come. As Emily looked back on everything she had overcome, she realized that this journey wasn't just about money, power, or fame. It had been about finding herself. It had been about proving to the world and to herself that she was capable of much more than anyone had ever imagined. And with each passing day, as the company grew stronger, Emily knew that she was finally living the life she had always dreamed of, a life built on her own terms. As the days passed, Emily continued to grow into her role, becoming more confident with every decision she made. The business had turned around in ways no one had expected. She had faced countless challenges, from family members trying to take over, to media scrutiny, and the constant pressure of managing Richard's empire. But through it all, she had found a way to not just survive but thrive. Her leadership was now undeniable, and the company was in better shape than it had ever been. Richard's health, unfortunately, continued to decline. The man who had once built this empire with his own hands was now frail, relying more and more on Emily for support. Despite his failing health, Richard never wavered in his belief in her abilities. He was proud of what she had accomplished and often told her how grateful he was that she had come into his life when she did. Though their relationship had started out of necessity, it had evolved into something more. They had grown close, and in Richard's final days, Emily became his anchor, his source of strength. But as the inevitable approached, Richard's family became more vocal in their opposition. They could see that they had no place in the future of the company, and their frustration grew. They still couldn't accept that Emily, the woman they had long criticized, was the one who had turned everything around. They believed it should have been them, not her, leading the empire they felt so entitled to. The media, too, continued to watch closely, waiting for any signs of weakness or scandal that could tear the business apart. Emily knew that Richard's passing was inevitable, but the weight of the responsibility he had placed on her shoulders felt heavier than ever. There were still lingering doubts in her mind, even though she had proven herself time and time again. What would happen after Richard was gone? Could she continue to run the company without his guidance? Would his family try to take control again? The future was uncertain, but Emily was determined to face it head-on. And then, one quiet evening, Richard passed away. His health had deteriorated quickly, and his passing, though expected, still left a profound emptiness in Emily's heart. She had spent so much time building her life around this new reality, and now she had to continue without him. It was a bittersweet moment. While Emily knew that she had grown stronger and had achieved so much, losing Richard was a reminder of how fragile everything could be. The world watched as the billionaire's empire passed into the hands of his wife, a woman they had once doubted. But Emily wasn't just inheriting wealth. She was inheriting a legacy, one that had been built on hard work, perseverance, and the vision of a man who had given everything to his business. She wasn't going to let his legacy fade. She knew she had to make the most of the opportunity she had been given. This wasn't just about taking over a company. This was about making sure it would thrive for generations to come. As she took the reins, Emily faced new challenges. Richard's children, still bitter about the whole situation, tried to undermine her at every turn. They attempted to rally support from shareholders, hoping to regain control of what they believed was rightfully theirs. But Emily wasn't backing down. She had learned to navigate the complexities of the business world, and she had earned the respect of those around her. With each move she made, it became clear that she wasn't just the widow of a billionaire. She was a powerful leader in her own right. And as the months went by, the company continued to flourish. The changes Emily had made were now widely recognized as transformative, and the industry began to take notice. She wasn't just running the business. She was shaping its future. Her vision for the company had become the driving force behind its success, and it was no longer just about maintaining what Richard had built. It was about expanding it, taking it to new heights. Emily had come a long way from the young woman who had married a dying billionaire for his wealth. She had proven herself in ways that no one had expected. She had faced opposition, doubt, and constant pressure, but she had triumphed. The legacy of Richard Monroe was in her hands now, and she was determined to make sure it would remain strong for years to come. As she looked to the future, Emily knew that her journey was far from over. But one thing was certain: she was ready for whatever came next.